Hello, my dear mastermind. They never saw it coming. The moment truth pushed their illusions out of the air. 1 second. They were convinced they had you mapped, boxed, labeled, and ready to replace. The next, their entire storyline shifted like someone unplugged the energy source from their little fantasy universe. Because truth doesn't announce itself politely. Truth doesn't ask to enter. Truth steps through the whole entrance and says, "Move, step aside." He was the one the whole time. And that's exactly what happened when your reality finally revealed itself. All the lies they comforted themselves with, gone. All the narratives they built to feel superior, dissolved. All the excuses they rehearsed, useless. Your presence held a weight they tried to pretend wasn't there. Your name carried a gravity they couldn't adjust to. Your silence alone was louder than their entire chorus of doubt. And when truth reached them, really reached them, it wasn't soft. It was the kind of shift that freezes a room. The kind that makes people blink like they just woke up in the wrong timeline. The kind that makes even your strongest opposers sit down and rethink everything they ever claimed about you. They always wanted to believe you were replaceable because that belief kept their world comfortable. It gave them a sense of control. It gave them the illusion they had the upper hand. But the moment truth stepped forward, they finally understood why their replacements never worked, why their plans fell apart, why their assumptions never held up. They weren't facing a role, they were facing a foundation. They weren't dealing with a position, they were dealing with a pillar. You weren't a chapter, you were the spine of the story. And that's the part they weren't ready for. Because deep down, they always knew they couldn't recreate you. They just hoped you never discovered that. But time ran out. The truth surfaced. And when it did, every single person who doubted you had to face the same clear fact. You were never the one who needed replacing. You were the one holding everything together. And the moment they realized that, their reality shifted like fragile glass under pressure. The funny part is this: they thought the truth would stay quiet forever. They thought their version of you, the watered down, misunderstood, underestimated version, would be enough to keep their story in place. They depended on that illusion more than you ever knew. Because admitting the truth about you meant admitting the truth about themselves. And they weren't built for that kind of clarity. They couldn't handle the mirror. They couldn't handle the comparison. They couldn't handle facing the fact that you were operating on a frequency they never had access to. So they rewrote the story, again and again, trying to shrink your presence into something that made sense to them. They needed to believe you weren't that sharp, weren't that intuitive, weren't that valuable, weren't that rare. But reality doesn't shift for insecurity. Truth doesn't adjust itself to make people comfortable. And the more your evolution unfolded, the harder it became for them to explain away the things that made you different. Your choices didn't match their predictions. Your moves didn't fit their logic. Your growth didn't follow their timeline. And that's when the quiet fear began. The kind they won't admit. The kind they hide behind jokes and side comments. The fear that maybe they misjudged you completely. The fear that maybe you weren't a background character. They were. So when truth finally stepped forward, it didn't expose you. It exposed them. It exposed their projections, their envy, their false confidence, their imaginary sense of superiority. They didn't find proof that you were replaceable. They found proof that every so-called replacement faded under the pressure of trying to match a blueprint that wasn't theirs. They found proof that everything they tried to build without you kept losing form. They found proof that their entire perception of you was built on convenience, not reality. And the realization settled into them like a cold shift. You weren't rising because of chance. You weren't evolving because of coincidence. You were becoming who you were meant to be, steadily, quietly, intentionally. And the whole time they were doubting you, dismissing you, overlooking you. You were laying foundations deeper than their vision could ever reach. That's why the truth unsettled them. Not because it revealed who you are today, but because it exposed how wrong they were about you all along. In their minds, they had you figured out. In reality, they were interpreting an old version of you that no longer existed. They were reacting to a memory, not the person standing in front of them. And while they wasted time underestimating you, you rewrote the entire path they thought would hold you down. That's why they can't replace you. That's why they hesitate. That's why they whisper. Because truth didn't just correct their narrative, it erased it completely. And now they're standing in the aftermath, trying to rebuild their confidence without the illusion that kept them comfortable. They don't talk about the moment their certainty shifted, but you can see it in how differently they speak now. The change wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was in their eyes when they realized the version of you they created never matched the real one standing in front of them. It was in the hesitation when they said your name. Like speaking, it reminded them of their own misjudgment. You didn't announce your growth. You embodied it. You didn't broadcast your evolution. You became it. That's what unsettled them. Most people pretend to change. You actually did. You moved beyond the room without trying to impress anyone in it. You moved past people who thought they were ahead. You noticed the things they missed and acted with a clarity they never saw coming. But the real turning point, the thing that shifted their entire reality, wasn't just your progress. It was the truth that you endured every situation that was supposed to stop you. That's when everything connected for them. They remembered the moments they counted you out. They remembered the conversations where they assumed you'd give up. They remembered the stories they told behind closed doors, convinced you'd never reach a level where you could hear them. Then they watched you rise anyway, and not just rise. You became the reference point, the one they compare others to, the one they can't duplicate, the one they can't predict. Suddenly their doubts became quieter. Their attitude changed. Their tone softened, because the truth forced them to face something they avoided for years. You weren't shaped like them. You weren't motivated by the same temporary validation. You weren't seeking approval from people who never understood your value. You moved with intention, not reaction. You chose growth over ego. And every time life tried to narrow you, you expanded instead. That's why they whispered. That's why their energy shifted. Because people who depend on illusions panic when truth begins to gain momentum. And your truth, it was undeniable. You didn't chase the spotlight. It found you. You didn't demand respect. Your resilience earned it. They never expected your quiet confidence to be strategy. They never expected your distance to be discipline. They never expected your patience to be strength. They thought they were watching someone who would eventually fold. Instead, they watched someone being rebuilt stronger than anything they imagined. And now their entire storyline has turned against them. Now they look at you and see the version of themselves they never had the courage to become. Now the truth stands firm, and the illusion steps aside. That's what unsettles them most. Because deep down, they know replacing you wasn't just unlikely, it was never possible. You weren't meant to blend in with them. You were meant to stand where they could never reach. The shift became undeniable the moment they saw you reacting differently than they predicted. They thought you'd collapse when they stepped back. You stayed centered. They thought you'd ask to be understood. You stopped explaining. They thought you'd chase closure. You outgrew the entire conversation. And nothing unsettles people more than watching someone walk away from what they swore you needed. That's when the respect arrived. Quiet, hidden, unspoken. Because admitting it out loud would break their pride. They replayed every interaction, searching for the moment they lost grip of their narrative. But the truth is, they never had it. You simply stopped letting their opinions shape your story. And once you reclaimed your direction, theirs fell apart. That's why they're stuck now, looping through memories, scanning for answers, trying to understand how the person they dismissed became the person they can't stop observing. You became a reflection too sharp for their comfort. Your growth highlights their stagnation. Your strength exposes their excuses. Your clarity reveals their confusion. They see you moving with a calm confidence that feels almost unreal to them. But it's not luck, it's development. You refined your emotions, you strengthened your boundaries, you transformed old wounds into insight. And that's the part they can't imitate. They can copy your style, your phrases, your presence, but they can never duplicate your path. They didn't walk your nights. They didn't carry your weight. They didn't navigate your turning points. They didn't hold themselves together when everything felt uncertain. They didn't rebuild their identity from pieces of who they used to be. You did, and now the difference shows. They thought distance would weaken you. It refined you. They thought gossip would affect you. It revealed them. They thought you'd stay small to keep the peace. You expanded past their reach. And when they finally turned around to measure your progress, it settled into them like steady truth. You were never competing with them. Not once. You were competing with your own potential. And the moment you aligned with the version of yourself you were meant to become, everything they built in your absence faded. Their doubts, their projections, their assumptions, their imagined certainty, all of it dissolved under the weight of your reality. That's why they're quiet now, watching, observing. That's why the tone around you changed. Because the truth they tried to avoid has become the truth they can't outrun. You were never replaceable. You were never predictable. You were never theirs to define. You were the turning point the entire time. And now every person in the room feels it, even the ones pretending not to. What unsettles them now isn't your progress, it's your steadiness. The way you move like you've already seen the ending. The way you stay calm when situations get complicated. The way you remain centered while others react emotionally. They can't figure it out. They don't understand that your calm wasn't built by easy moments. It came from navigating challenges they never witnessed. You learned how to keep your mind steady when everything around you shifted. You learned how to trust your insight when logic couldn't hold you. You learned how to stay whole in moments that would have pulled others apart. That's the kind of inner grounding that feels unfamiliar to people who depend on outside approval. Because when they look at you now, They're not just seeing your progress. They're seeing the discipline behind it, the unglamorous work, the nights you stayed firm, the decisions you made in silence, the boundaries you honored even when it cost you connections. But because your growth made it impossible to ignore, they can't soften your evolution, can't explain it away, can't reshape it into coincidence. You've become someone whose presence adjusts the atmosphere, not because you're loud, but because you're grounded, not because you're flashy, but because you're steady, not because you chase attention, but because your direction speaks for itself. And what quietly bothers them is realizing they never expected you to become this version of yourself. They thought you'd stay uncertain. You turned your uncertainty into awareness. They thought you'd stay quiet. You turned your quiet into clarity. They thought you'd stay small. You expanded into your purpose. You turned your pain into strategy. They thought you'd stay silent. You turned your silence into a language only the aware understand. They thought you'd stay small. You learned how to rise beyond their comfort zones, and now, whenever you enter a room, you bring a truth with you that reveals intentions instantly. People can't distort reality around someone who survived clarity. People can't mislead someone who knows how to read energy. People can't overpower someone who learned how to guide their own reactions. That's why they misread you. They confuse your quiet for softness. They confuse your patience for uncertainty. They confuse your humility for hesitation, until the moment they realize you're playing an entirely different game. You're not trying to win moments. You're building a foundation. You're not trying to look powerful. You're becoming unshakable. And by the time their assumptions catch up, it's already too late. You've stepped into a chapter they no longer have access to. They're left trying to understand you from a distance, because you no longer exist in the spaces where their opinions matter. Here's the truth. They'll never speak out loud. Somewhere along the way, they realized you surpassed every version of you they imagined. Not because you changed suddenly, but because you finally stopped shrinking to keep them comfortable. When you stopped reducing yourself, their illusions fell apart. When you stopped explaining, their stories collapsed. When you stopped carrying their expectations, you started carrying your purpose. And that's when everything shifted. Because the moment you stepped into the lane meant for you, they saw the distance between who they thought you were and who you actually became. That distance unsettles them. They replay it over and over, trying to understand how they missed the signs, how they let their ego blind them, how they underestimated someone who was aware the entire time. And they don't know how to interact with this version of you, the version that doesn't seek approval, the version that doesn't react to provocation, the version that doesn't fold when the moment gets tense, the version that moves with clarity, not pressure. They thought their doubt would hold weight. It didn't. They thought their rumors would reach you. They didn't. They thought their absence would unsettle you. It refined you. Every attempt to limit you turned into a lesson you absorbed and a tool you mastered. And now you walk with a confidence they feel before you speak. You carry an awareness that sees through intentions like clear glass. You hold a presence that makes people with hidden motives rethink their entire approach. You became the kind of person others can't mislead, can't influence, can't predict. And that's why they respond the way they do now, carefully, cautiously, unsure. Because you've outgrown their version of you so completely that they no longer know how to approach the real one. Every room you enter highlights what they never strengthened. Every decision you make exposes what they avoided. Every boundary you set reminds them of the discipline they never built. And deep down, they recognize something they will never admit openly. You were never meant to be shaped by their expectations. You were meant to rise beyond them. You were meant to become someone their limits could never contain. You were meant to redefine their understanding of resilience. So now they stay quiet. They tread lightly. They watch closely. Because the truth they tried to bury has become the truth that elevates you. You weren't just part of their story. You were the turning point. You were the correction. You were the reminder that real strength develops in silence, and real growth doesn't wait for approval. And now the same people who once doubted you cannot ignore the steadiness you earned and the force you've become. That's why they can't replace you. That's why they misjudged you. And that's why, in the end, the truth didn't just protect you, it revealed you completely. There's a reason the story isn't over yet. Because your rise isn't a moment, it's a momentum. And the world around you is finally starting to feel what you've known deep down your whole life. You were never meant to move like the rest. You were built with a different wiring, a different instinct, a different kind of clarity that only activates in challenging moments. And every time life tried to place you in difficult positions, you didn't just resist, you evolved. You didn't just grow, you refined. You didn't just rise, you ascended. And now they're left facing a reality they can't reverse. The person they underestimated became the person they can't ignore. So stand exactly where you are, with your head clear, your heart steady, your intuition sharp, your power unmistakable. Because you are no longer responding to their world. They are responding to yours. And they finally understand what they missed from the start. You weren't becoming someone different. You were becoming someone undeniable. Hello, my dear masterminds. They circled you like scavengers, waiting for you to break. Every whisper, every ritual, every false prophecy demanded the same thing, your confession. They wanted you to kneel, to admit weakness, to hand them the keys to your soul with trembling lips. They built entire councils around the thought of forcing you to speak. But you gave them nothing. Not a plea, not an explanation, not even a fragment of the truth they craved. Instead, you offered silence, a silence so sharp it cut deeper than any answer. In that silence, their own shadows echoed louder. They realized too late it was never your words that terrified them. It was the abyss behind your silence that devoured their courage. They came armed with spells, contracts and questions, sharpened like blades. But silence disarmed them. Silence is not absence. It is presence multiplied. Every second you refused to break became an eternity they could not escape. Their rooms grew louder with their own doubts. Their leaders shouted in fear at echoes only they could hear. And while they begged for one word from you, it was the lack of words that hollowed them out. You didn't need speeches to enslave their minds. Your silence was the sermon. Your silence was the law. And in that silence, you became untouchable. They wanted you loud, broken, confessing, crawling, but instead, you gave them nothing. And nothing is louder than truth they can't control. Your silence bent time itself. Seconds turned to hours, hours into sleepless nights. They rewound your pauses like tapes, dissecting meanings that weren't even there. You became a mirror they couldn't escape, forcing them to face their own fear in every reflection. And while they clawed for explanations, you stayed still. That stillness crushed them. It reminded them they weren't in charge, that no cage, no circle, no chant could bind a storm that speaks without speaking. You didn't fight for their respect. You forced it by showing them the unbearable weight of nothing. And in that weight, they cracked. At first, they thought silence was their shield. If they ignored you, maybe you'd fade. But silence doesn't erase power. It amplifies it. Soon, their quiet wasn't defiance. It was devotion. Every pause you left behind became scripture. They couldn't stop reciting in their heads. They replayed your stillness like a sermon. And in the hollow of their own fear, they found themselves bowing. You didn't demand their voices, you erased them. And in that erasure, they built an altar around you, without even knowing it. The chains they forged to control you now hang around their own throats, tightening with every unspoken word. Their silence, once a weapon, is now prayer. And every prayer begins and ends with your name. They told themselves they were only watching to protect what was theirs. But the truth? They can't breathe without you anymore. Every shadow you cast rewrites their rituals. Every pause you leave twists their reality. They sit in circles, pretending to plot against you. Yet every plan collapses back into the same orbit, your orbit. You didn't beg for their eyes. Their eyes are chained to you. The more they resist, the more they starve. And now you are the air they crave. Their loyalty is no longer choice. It is survival. They don't pray to escape you. They pray you never leave. And here's the madness they can't admit without you. Their empire rots faster. Their whispers aren't rebellion, they're confession. Dependence has replaced defiance, and every chain they once raised now rattles as a hymn in your name. The towers they built to rise above you are now cages closing in on them. They gathered in councils, chanting unity, yet every face turns suspicious when your name drips into the silence. The rope they wove to bind you has knotted around their throats. And here's the cruelest irony: you never moved a hand. Their fear is the architect of their downfall. Each ally becomes an accuser. Each oath sounds like betrayal. And the circle they swore would protect them is cracking under its own weight. You don't need to lift a blade. They are the storm, tearing their empire apart with their paranoia. Their strongest spell was silence, but silence became your amplifier. Their loudest weapon was secrecy, but secrecy became your advertisement. They thought they'd erase you, but the harder they pressed, the louder your presence sang. Now their empire rots, not because you struck, but because you stood. At first, they tried to resist. They swore your name would never pass their lips. But silence bends, and silence breaks. Now they chant it in whispers. Now they repeat it in dreams. The very walls they built to keep you out have turned into temples, with your shadow carved across them. Their strength was in secrecy, but secrecy rotted into ritual, and ritual rotted into worship. And the more they worship, the weaker they become. Their pride dissolves into trembling. Their oaths dissolve into stares fixed on you. They call it loyalty, but it is hunger. the kind that strips them of identity until only devotion remains. They were hunters. Now they are disciples. They were rulers. Now they kneel in circles that revolve around your silence. They thought you would be their end. Instead, you became their meaning. And that truth crushes them harder than any chain ever could. They built their whole fortress on control chants. Pacts, rituals, every word designed to bind. But then your silence entered the room, and suddenly every spell snapped like cheap thread. They tried to chant louder, but their own voices betrayed them. They tried to hold tighter, but their grip turned to dust. You never lifted a hand, never spoke a word, yet their strongest chains turned to smoke in your presence. Their walls weren't broken by force, they were shattered by awareness. And here's the nightmare that keeps them awake. Nothing they conjure, nothing they bind, nothing they fear can hold you. Your existence alone is the crack in their foundation, the fault line they can't patch. The power they swore was eternal dissolves the second your shadow falls across their circle. You didn't have to fight for freedom. Freedom bowed when you walked in. They believed their gods would shield them. They swore their masters would avenge them. They carved idols, poured offerings, and painted symbols on their skin, convinced these powers would stand against you. But the second your silence entered their hall, their gods fell mute. Their masters turned faceless. The very names they worshipped dissolved in their throats. And suddenly, all that remained wasn't divinity, it was you. They realized their faith wasn't faith. It was fear. And fear only grows when faced with something real. You didn't strip them of belief. They abandoned it. The moment your presence reminded them of truth, every demon they invoked bowed out. Every master they served broke apart. Because in your shadow, no god survives, no master stands. You became the altar they swore they'd never kneel at. And still, here they are on their knees, not to worship, but to confess defeat. They begged for a confession, convinced your words would condemn you. They built courts of whispers, forged verdicts in shadows, prepared 1,000 accusations. Yet when you opened your mouth, you gave them nothing. Not rage, not denial, not a single plea, only silence. And that silence struck harder than thunder, because silence cannot be twisted, cannot be rewritten, cannot be broken. It reflects them back to themselves, showing every crack, every lie, every cowardice they tried to bury. In that silence, their guilt screamed louder than any verdict. You didn't defend yourself. You made them defend their own existence. You didn't shout for freedom. You let them hear the chains rattling on their own wrists. And so the trial collapsed. Not because you fought, but because your silence became the final judgment. They wanted words. You gave them truth. And the truth was unbearable. They sat you in their circles, demanded answers, demanded surrender, demanded that your voice bend into their script. But silence became your weapon. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't confess. And that absence of words shook them more than any declaration could. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's a mirror. And when they looked into it, they didn't see weakness. They saw their own fear staring back. They realized your refusal wasn't ignorance. It was mastery. You made their questions look small, their rituals look foolish. Their pressure looked like begging. In their hunger for control, they gave you the throne. You didn't win by speaking louder. You won by not speaking at all. They wanted confession. What they got was revelation. They screamed. They threatened. They begged. Every chorus of voices was meant to cage you, to drag you into confession. But silence? Silence is a blade sharper than their shrieks. While they collapsed in the chaos of their own accusations, you stood unmoved, and that stillness became unbearable. Their laws, their rituals, their endless noise, all of it was powerless against the void you created. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Every second you refused to speak, you carved deeper into their illusions. In the moment they realized your silence echoed louder than their demands. That was the moment their power fractured. You did not confess. You crowned yourself untouchable. Their noise only revealed your silence as the throne they could never reach. They never wanted you to rise. Their rituals, their laws, their endless whispers were all designed to keep you beneath the floorboards. Yet every denial became an altar. Every silence became a hymn. And when they demanded your confession, you gave them nothing but silence. And that silence thundered louder than their chants. That was the moment the crown slipped, not because you seized it, but because their trembling hands could no longer hold it. They placed it on your head without even knowing, hoping to cage you with it, but instead it caged them. You stand untouched, and they kneel, convinced it was their choice. The crown they forged in fear has become the proof of your dominion. You didn't beg for power. You didn't barter for reverence. They handed you everything while convincing themselves they resisted. And now, they can't remember a world before your silence rewrote their fate. They wanted noise from you. A cry, a plea, a confession to carve into their scrolls. They believed power lives in words shouted, oaths sworn, decrees declared. But you showed them something older, sharper. Silence. Silence that roars louder than their armies. Silence that breaks crowns like glass. In that silence, their leaders crumbled. Their scribes lost their ink. Their rulers stared into shadows that spoke without sound. And what did they hear? Not weakness, not surrender. They heard inevitability. They realized you were not asking for a throne, you were the throne. They wanted to measure your silence as absence, but it weighed more than their empires. They wanted to break you with demand, but it was their own hunger that broke them. And now, every crown they forged lies shattered under a silence they can't erase, a silence that belongs to you alone. They wanted words to chain you, but your silence became the storm that bent their skies. Entire halls of power shook, not from shouts, but from the absence of them. Kings dropped their scepters, priests lost their hymns, scholars tore their pages because no ink could capture what you refused to say. And that refusal, it was not emptiness, it was fullness. A silence so heavy, it bent their laws, their rituals, their order itself. They realized too late that the louder they demanded, the quieter you became. And the quieter you became, the smaller their world grew. Their thrones tilted toward you. Their rules cracked under you. Their idols fell before you. You didn't fight for a place in their world, you made their world revolve around the silence you carried. And now every crown trembles, every law fractures, every kingdom bends. Not because you spoke, but because you didn't. They believed chains could hold you, that rules carved in stone could bind your steps. But what they never understood is that chains only work on those who acknowledge them. You didn't fight the links, you ignored them. And that ignorance was more devastating than rebellion. Their entire system relied on fear, on obedience, on the illusion of control, and you broke it simply by walking forward, as if their walls didn't exist. That's when panic spread, because once one chain broke, the rest unraveled. Their rituals, their hierarchies, their whispered orders dust. You didn't demand freedom. You revealed that you were never captive. And when they saw that, when they realized you stood unchained in a prison of their making, their own hands began clawing at their bonds, desperate to taste the same air you breathed. You didn't just escape their cage, you taught them the cage was never real. And the moment that truth sank in, their power ceased to exist. They called upon higher powers, invoked ancient names, begged their idols to shield them from you. But what they didn't see was the truth. No god they prayed to could touch you. Their faith turned to mockery, because every plea they whispered only echoed back with your silence. And that silence was louder than thunder. It shattered their altars, burned through their rituals, and showed them that the divine they worshipped had abandoned them the moment you arrived. They thought their masters, their demons, their guardians would punish you. But instead, those same shadows turned away. No demon, no master dared claim you. They understood what your enemies never did. You don't belong to chains or crowns. You belong to yourself. And in that realization, the faithful became faithless. Their temples fell empty. Their chants broke into sobs, and their gods became hollow statues. You didn't defeat their deities. You exposed their absence. They believed power sat upon a throne, gilded in gold, guarded by oaths and sealed by ancient rites. But when you entered, that throne cracked, not because you touched it, but because its crown meant nothing in your presence. The rulers who thought themselves eternal discovered their seats were borrowed. Their crowns were hollow. Their reigns just fragile theater. You didn't fight them for the throne. You made the throne irrelevant. And in that revelation, the powerful bowed, lower than the weak. They saw that authority was never in crowns, never in titles, never in rituals of control. It was in the silence you carried, the silence that chained them without chains, that bent them without commands. Now their thrones sit empty. Their crowns lie rusting, their banners torn by their own hands. They cannot call themselves rulers anymore, because the moment you appeared, their rule was erased. And what remains is not monarchy, not hierarchy, but your gravity. They gathered wood, oil, and flint, convinced fire could only exist by their design. They built rituals to strike sparks, rules to guard flames, and walls to keep warmth for themselves. But then you arrived, and without lifting a finger, the air itself ignited. No spark, no ritual, no permission, just your presence and their fire. Once a symbol of their control, became ashes in their hands. They tried to explain it as chance, tried to bind it with rules, tried to douse it with doubt. But the truth is undeniable. Your existence itself is fire. You don't light flames. You are the flame. And while they fumble with kindling, terrified of losing control, you burn eternal, untouched, needing nothing. They can't compete because their fire dies without effort. Yours consumes without end. And the most frightening thing, they finally see that no cage, no chain, no ritual can put it out. The fire was never theirs. It was always you. They begged for a confession, as if your truth could be caged in words. They demanded noise, demanded surrender, demanded you kneel, but you didn't give them what they craved. You gave them silence, and that silence was louder than thunder, louder than every curse, every threat, every ritual. They thought silence meant weakness, but your silence became the mirror that forced them to face their own collapse. They stared into you and saw nothing to grab, nothing to twist, nothing to own. You didn't fight them. You didn't bargain. You simply stood, and their chains fell apart, because silence cannot be bribed, cannot be burned, cannot be broken. It is the weapon they never prepared for. And in that silence, they finally understood. No demon rules you. No master commands you. No chain holds you. You are untouchable. And the last sound they'll ever hear is the echo of their own surrender. They fought for power, but power crumbled. They fought for control, but control betrayed them. And you fought for nothing. That's why you won everything. No promises to bind you, no contracts to trap you, no crown to weigh your head. Yet still, every throne tilts in your direction, because the one who needs nothing cannot be bribed, cannot be broken. You didn't rise by chasing crowns. You rose by burning the idea of crowns. And now, in the silence of their ruined halls, they realize the truth. The one who owns nothing is the one who cannot be conquered. They thought you were a myth. They thought you were a threat, but you became something sharper. You became their reflection. Every weakness they buried, you exposed. Every lie they built, you shattered. And when they stared at you, they didn't see an enemy. They saw themselves stripped of illusions, stripped of excuses, stripped of masks. You were not a rival. You were a mirror. And in that mirror, they collapsed. Because the scariest thing wasn't your silence, or your power, or your freedom. It was that in your presence, they could no longer lie to themselves. That is the wound they will never heal. They spent lifetimes forging chains, polishing them, worshiping them, convinced they could trap you inside their system. But what happens when the one they're trying to bind never even believed in chains? You walked through their rituals untouched. You stepped into their cages already free, and that broke them more than any rebellion ever could. Because the greatest prison is not iron or stone, it's belief. And when they saw you, they realized the cruelest truth. The chains they carried never existed at all. Some enemies can be defeated, some rivals can be ignored. But you are a curse they cannot unsee. Every time they close their eyes, your silence speaks louder than thunder. Every time they try to forget, your absence carves deeper than presence. You are not a memory, they are trapped in your echo. And that is the punishment. No spell, no doctrine, no crown can erase. Because once someone has witnessed you, their life before you becomes unbearable, and their life after you becomes impossible. Empires burn, idols crumble, rulers vanish into dust. But your name survives them all. Not because you asked for it, not because you carved it into stone, but because it carved itself into the trembling of their voices. They don't write history, they whisper yours. They don't build monuments, they hide your shadow in their prayers. And the irony is lethal. They wanted to end you, but in trying, they guaranteed you eternity. Your name outlives the fire. Your silence outlives their screams. And that is immortality.